Welcome to Summer Bakes the World. I'm Summer. On this channel, we bake traditional breads from around the world, providing a little history and a plethora of tips. So join me, whether in my kitchen or yours, and together we can discover the world. Fall is here and we are at the beginning of the holiday season. On the horizon, we have international celebrations such as Halloween, All Saints' Day, La Toussaint, and Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead. So let's take a trip. Today, let's head south of the US border to Mexico and start the holiday season baking the well-known pan de muerto, known as bread of the dead. There are many different variations of pan de muerto, depending on where you are geographically in Mexico. Variations include different shapes, textures, and flavors. The recipe we're using today is specific to Mexico City. This variation of bread is sweet and herbaceous. Yes, I said the word herbaceous. And in this case, I'm referring to aniseed, which is added to the bread and provides a nice, slight licorice aroma. This style of loaf is sweetened with a nice orange juice glaze at the end, and it is decorated with bits of dough that look like bones and skulls. And of course, that's why this bread is called bread of the dead. For the recipe and additional information about the history of this bread, please see the links below in the description of this video. Here we go. Let's take a look at the ingredients. The ingredients for today include butter, granulated sugar, aniseed, salt, flour. Either bread or all-purpose flour is fine. I'm using bread for that nice glutinous stretch and the baked crumb. Eggs, warm water, no warmer than about 110 degrees, orange zest, and yeast. We're going to mix the first half of the ingredients all together, and I'm using my KitchenAid mixer to mix it up to make it fairly easy. So we're going to start out with 4 ounces of butter, which is a half a cup or 1 stick. It's all the same. So we're going to stick our butter in there and notice how it's nice and soft. Get our mixer going here, start whipping it up. I like this handy dandy attachment. It has little rubber edges in order to reach all areas of the bowl, which is kind of handy to have.
We're going to add 3/4 of a cup of granulated sugar.
We also have 3 teaspoons of aniseed. We're going to mix that in as well. You can leave it out if you choose. Part of the Mexico City version of this bread is having that nice little extra flavor. We're also going to add a teaspoon of salt. Oddly enough, we're going to add a little bit of flour to this. And this is an interesting batter because normally when you're making bread, you put
the wet ingredients and then add the dry ingredients. Where here we're kind of doing a little bit of both in different stages. First, we're going to add just a half a cup of flour. Remember, when you're measuring your flour, fluff it up in the container and then spoon it into your measuring cup. That way you're avoiding packed flour in your cup, adding more than you really need. Notice our butter, sugar, aniseed, and salt are well combined. We're now going to slowly pour in the flour.
That's our first half cup. Now, when you're making batter or dough, one reason why you always want to make sure that your ingredients are at room temperature is 1, the dough and the batter will take less time to bake when they're all at the same temperature. And also, butter breaks down more easily when at room temperature, thus making a smoother batter or dough. Take a nice look at our butter mixture. Notice how smooth the mixture is. It's been just whipped until combined. You don't have to whip it for very long. We're going to move on to the next step now, which is to whisk 4 eggs. And I already put 3 in the bowl. And I want to show you something. Look at one of the eggs, how both of them have really started to break up. And this is another reason why you want your eggs at room temperature. I saved the last egg, the 4th one, so I could show you how important it is to actually crack your egg in a separate bowl first before you add it to your main bowl, because if you don't, if you accidentally get shells in, which I do on occasion get shells in my eggs, so you can scoop the shells out if you accidentally get the shell in. To these 4 eggs, we're going to add 1.25 cups of water, and it should be at 110 degrees. The thermometer says 110 degrees. It's right at the temperature that we want. We're just going to pour it in with the eggs and continue to whisk. And then the last thing we're going to do is add orange zest. And this is going to give it that nice tangy flavor to the dough. I'm going to do 2 tablespoons of orange zest. And I'm actually using mandarin oranges because that's what I have in my house, in my fridge. So I've already zested 3 mandarin oranges, and I have almost 2 tablespoons. It's close to it. But you probably will need about 2 oranges depending on how big they are, the zest. And so then we're just going to mix it in with our egg and water and then whisk it up One more reason you would want to have room temperature eggs, it'll prevent the butter from clumping, because if the eggs are cold and we were to put these cold eggs into the butter right now, the butter would start to harden. I've reattached my paddle with the rubber edges. We're gonna slowly pour it into the mixer as it's running. And keeping it on low so we don't have anything splash out of the mixture. We're gonna dispersing here with a little bit of flour. This is another ½ cup flour. In total, you'll have no more than 6 cups of flour. Okay, adding the rest of the liquid. We're gonna add now 4½ teaspoons of yeast. This is 2 packages of yeast from the store. We're gonna slowly pour this in. While that is mixing up, we're gonna go ahead and add another cup of flour slowly. This is cup number 3, and we'll do no more than 6. I'm gonna switch out paddles here. Let's get this out. Let's add our dough hook. We're gonna add another cup of flour. We finished adding our 4th cup flour in. And I want to stop it so that you can take a look at what the dough looks like. It's still pretty wet and runny, so we definitely need to add more flour. So that's 4 cups. We're about to add our 5th cup. And we're about to start our 6th cup here. It's quite a bit thicker than it was before. Start adding the 6th cup in, and then we'll just have to kind of eyeball it, and I'll let you know when we're ready. It looks like I used pretty much all of the 6th cup. Notice the dough has definitely pulled away from the sides. It has oozed up onto the dough hook. Now, look, if you can do this, if you can take your dough and separate between your 2 fingers and it separates like that, it's a little sticky, it's gonna be a nice dough that's gonna rise well. We're ready to start kneading. Okay, our board is floured. Let's scoop out our dough. This really is a heavy dough. So let me tell you a little bit about gluten. The highest percentage of flour with gluten is bread flour. And bread flour has about 13% gluten. All-purpose flour has about 11 or 12% gluten. And then what gluten does, when it gets wet, it creates these little fibers in the bread. And then when it bakes, it produces all this extra air that goes between the fibers. Bread baked with bread flour is likely to produce a higher layered loaf than all-purpose flour. You can use all-purpose flour, but it may not be as high as you would like for it to be. So quickly show you about kneading. Make sure your hands are floured well. Fold your dough over towards you like a book, and then push forward with the palm of your hand. Okay, so you're gonna just do this over and over. We're gonna do this for about 5 to 10 minutes just to make sure that the gluten is well developed so that we have a nice, tall, fluffy loaf of bread. As I'm kneading, look at the dough. You can see the aniseed, the little dark bits are aniseed, and the little orangey bits are, of course, the orange zest. All right, it's been a few minutes. We're gonna let it rise. So what I like to do, I'm gonna spray my bowl. I love to use this bowl for rising because it's a tall bowl, and this is my KitchenAid mixer bowl. You know, I did use a mixer to mix these ingredients, but if you don't have a mixer, you can do this by hand in a regular bowl and it will be fine. So we're gonna place our, did you hear that was heavy, dough in the bottom of that bowl. Spray the top so that the plastic comes off easily when we're ready after it rises, because it's gonna rise pretty tall. It should double in size. I already put my oven, set it to 200 degrees so that it can warm up over in that space, and I'm just going to put the bowl with the dough in it on top of the stove because it's a nice warm space over there, and of course the plastic keeps any drafts from getting in or out and creates a nice little cozy space for the dough to rise. So we're gonna let it rise for about an hour, hour and a half, but I'll check it about 45 minutes to an hour, and when it doubles in size, then it'll be ready. Our dough is ready. It was sitting on the stove over warm oven set at 200 degrees Fahrenheit for an hour and a half. So take a look. We can remove the plastic. There's no sticking. Of course, it didn't rise up to the plastic. And we're just going to pop it out onto our floured surface. And then we're going to make something really cool out of it. Be a little artistic. And I'm not artistic, but we're going to make something artistic out of this dough. This is the base of the dough, of the bread, right? So now we're going to make some bones, because this is the dead bread dough, the bread of the dead. We're gonna make 2 cross bones and a skull out of this loaf. So we're gonna need about a quarter of it. So we're just gonna eyeball, but I actually want a pretty good amount of it. It's gonna all be baked on top, so you're gonna get to eat it all anyway. It's just a matter of getting enough dough so that we can make what we need to make out of it. Okay, I'm gonna make a small little ball for the skull, which is gonna go on top. And then we're going to divide this in half. And they're going to be 2 long bones here. Let's roll it out. They're going to have knobs on them. There are a variety of different types of bones you can make. This was the one that goes with the recipe, and I kind of like it. I think it's pretty cool, and I'm not artistic, so to bear with me on this. If you just squeeze like that, you can get the size that you need. Okay, so just squeeze at 3 sections. So you've got the bulge at the end, you've got the one next to it, and then one near the end. Now let's try a second one. So let's make the ball on the end. So I'm just going to squeeze. There you go. Make one next to it. There you go. And then one at the end. And let's go back and define them again. Make sure that they're spread out enough so that they don't bake looking like one blob, that you've got 4 individual bone pieces there. Okay, so I think that is probably about as good as it's going to get. We'll see what it looks like when it actually bakes. So there are cross bones, and what we're going to do with these, we're actually going to cross them so they crisscross once we get our loaf in the right shape. The shapes that we're making have a significance in Mexican culture. These shapes here are the bones to represent us all at death and our loved ones who have passed on from this life. The round shaped bread, which is what we're making right here, is going to represent the body. So you want to get this pretty nice round shape. You have to manipulate it just a bit. It can be left at the cemeteries and or enjoyed en familia to remember the past. So that's how this bread is used in Mexico. We're ready to put it all together. So I have a cookie sheet here with a piece of parchment paper on top. I'm just going to sit my nice round body here of our bread. Try to make sure it's flattened out just a dough here. And this is what we do with the crossbones. We're just going to lay them over, trying to make sure that the balls are separated from each other. And then we're going to place the other one on the other side, making sure to have the separation in the cross of each bone here. And we want to press them down a little bit into the bread so that they adhere, bake all together nice and neatly. And then we're going to put our little skull on top. Make sure we don't have any creases in it if we can. Make it look nice and pretty. And there you are. We're going to sit it back on the stove over the oven that's set at 200 degrees. And let it rise for another hour. And I'm going to use the wrap that I had over the bowl, and I'm going to spray a little bit with cooking spray just so it doesn't stick, but it keeps the drafts out. While the dough is rising over the oven in the warm space, about 45 minutes in, we're gonna set the oven to 350 degrees. Wow, check out this loaf. It has really increased in size. So it was over the stove. I let it sit for about 50 minutes, and I'm afraid to let it sit any longer. It's gonna start deflating on its own. Remember, we sprayed the plastic wrap with cooking spray before so that we can hopefully just pull it right off without taking any of the dough with it. And look at that. So we're gonna put it in the oven at 350 degrees for 40 minutes and then check it and make sure it's nice and golden brown on top. And in the meantime, we're going to make our nice, sweet, sugary orange glaze to brush over it once it's cooled. Are you ready to make our sweet orange glaze? Remember those mandarin oranges we had at the beginning of the recipe? Well, and we used the zest. Well, I have 3 squeezed into the measuring cup here, and I'm going to do my last one. We're just going to simply cut it in half, squeeze it in, and we're trying to get to a half of a cup, so the last bit. So who wants to waste? When you're using zest, you don't want to waste the juice and the fruit itself. So it's always nice when you have something else that you can use it for, and you can usually put those back in the fridge. In the saucepan, we're going to put 3/4 of a cup of sugar, and this is just simply granulated. And then I'm just going to quickly whisk in our freshly squeezed orange juice. You saw it here. And we're going to let this sit over the stove, let it come to a brief boil. Our mixture of freshly squeezed mandarin orange juice is now being whisked. I have the heat set at medium. Our sugary orange glaze is ready. Notice it's bubbling, particularly when I lift up the whisk, and I think it's done. So we're going to just turn off the heat and then remove it from the stove and let it cool. Look at this massive loaf of bread. I guess my new motto is go big or go home. Quickly, I want to check the temperature. So when you are baking bread, with lighter breads, you want the internal temperature to read 180 to 200 degrees. With a denser bread, you want it to be 190 to 210, and our bread is 190, so we're gonna go with it. I ended up leaving it in the oven for an additional 15 minutes, so this bread cooked for a total of 55 minutes. If you don't want a loaf this big, you can divide it in half and do 2 separate loaves. And I think my bones would have come out looking a little better if I'd have divided it in half, then it wouldn't have spread so much. So it looks like my skull moved over to the side and separated from the other side, which looks like this. You can still see the bones, it's all there, it's just sort of lopsided. My bread was getting pretty dark. At the 40-minute mark, I ended up covering it with foil because I knew I needed to leave it in there for another 10 or 15 minutes. So 55 minutes for an entire loaf. I wish you could smell my house right now. This is like the quintessential holiday bread. And I haven't even tasted this bread yet. And I can smell the warmth from the aniseed, the citrus from the orange zest. I mean, I really do feel like this is the holidays. It's cooled now and our orange glaze is cooled. So guess what? We're just gonna do a quick little brush over our bread. We are pretty much finished glazing our bread here. And we have a little glaze left over. And let me tell you, this is awesome. After you've sliced the bread tomorrow, next day, and you eat it, pour some of this glaze on it, and you've got some extra sweetness. We're gonna finish off by just putting a little bit of sprinkling of cane sugar, and this just gives it a little bit of sparkle. Who can't have the holidays without some sparkle, right? So this bread does smell amazing. So let's cut into it and let's see what it looks like on the inside. I'm actually gonna pull up the entire half so you can take a look. Remember, I had to put it in for another 15 minutes. It's bouncing back, so the bread is done. Notice the aniseed and the citrus zest on the inside. It is a pretty loaf on the inside. Of course, the sugar on the exterior. You can definitely smell the sweetness. I can smell the aniseed. I don't think the aniseed here is going to be very strong, but it is a slight hint of that licorice, which is what aniseed smells like, but it's not strong. It's very, very faint. And then, of course, the citrus, you can smell the citrus halfway across the kitchen. So the recommendation for this bread is to cut it in wedges, and then you serve it with hot chocolate. So what I want to do is I want to show you the crumb here. Look how fluffy this is, how light it is. And then just when I tear it apart in the center, look at the stretch of that crumb as it pulls apart. It's a very light bread. Well, since I'm gluten intolerant, I can't even eat my own bread. So I enlisted Scott here, my trusty husband and happy eater of all things edible, to be my taste buds. So he's going to try the bread for us today and tell us what he thinks about it. Scott?
So what's the occasion?
It is Dia de los Muertos, which is Mexican celebration for Day of the Dead. And it's a celebration in memory of all the family members who have died.
Okay, great.
Okay, what are some nuances that you taste?
It's sweet, but it's very subtle. I can taste orange.
Yes, it has orange zest in it.
And some spice, kind of a licorice taste.
Yes, that's the aniseed. Is it strong or is it very slight?
It's very subtle. Probably may not have even noticed it unless that was really thinking about it.
So maybe someone who doesn't like licorice, do you think they could enjoy this bread?
Yeah, I think so. It's so subtle, I don't think they would notice it.
Okay. Well, folks, there you have it. A seasonal bread to kick off the holiday season. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, share my video with your friends and family members who enjoy baking. And if you're interested in the recipe, check the link below the video in the description. And until next time, go bake the world.